Thank you, Matt. Our opening words are reading number 421 from our hymnal, Singing a Living Tradition. Sing a new song. Sing a new song to the eternal. Shout praise, all earth. Break into music and song. Praise the eternal with lyre and song. Let the sea and all within it thunder praise. The world and its inhabitants, let rivers clap their hands. Let mountains sing in chorus. Oh, sing a new song to the eternal. Welcome to the Sunday service for today, June 20th, of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Pensacola, Florida, led by the Reverend Alice Silty, and the Unitarian Universalist Church of Birmingham, Alabama, led by the Reverend Julie Conradi. Reverend Julie and Mary Lee Donnelly, our Sunday Services Committee Leader, are your Zoom hosts for this service. I'm Laura Keith King, and I'll be your worship associate today. We are very excited to have Matt Meyer with us today. Matt Meyer is a musician and a worship leader. Matt lives in Boston, but travels as an itinerant workshop leader, bringing the good news of Unitarian Universalism to hundreds of congregations all over the country. Today he didn't have to travel beyond his own home, but maybe someday we'll see him in person, as I did at the General Assembly a few years ago in New Orleans. Matt serves as Director of Community Life for Sanctuary, Boston, a contemporary UU worship community with rockin' music and engaging worship. Matt is also a founding organizer of the UU Song Leaders Convergence, a gathering for all UUs who love community singing to share skills, best practices, and of course songs, in order to build a more musical movement together. Matt's children's story, Desmond Gets Free, was recently published as a book by Skinner House Press. To get a copy for a child, teacher, or any justice maker in your life, check out the link in the chat. And now I will light the chalice. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers, not to harm, but to heal, not to hinder, but to help, not to curse, but to bless, and to serve you, Spirit of Freedom. And now, our opening song with Matt Meyer.
This song, Blessed Motion, was written by Annie Zylstra, in part when she was inspired by the words of Martin Prechtel, speaking of what it was like to have survived an earthquake in Guatemala. Prechtel spoke of what it was like to see the ground beneath his feet, that which had always been so permanent and so solid, suddenly rise up in motion. And he said that the myth of believing in solid ground is a myth believed by those who live on the earth, rather than those who live as a part of the earth. I know that for the last year now, I have been constantly searching for some sense of grounding, even as it feels like the ground beneath my feet is constantly shifting. So if that's been true for you as well, I invite you into the spirit of this song, to be in motion with the earth and to be in movement together. For all of our music this morning, you'll be muted, but I still invite you to sing along at home. This is a great time to try out some new harmonies you might not have been so bold to try if others could hear you. This song has a low part and then a high part that's call and response. Sing along at home with whatever part works best for you. Go ahead and make up a new one. I believed in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion, in the winds of steady change, and the ever-rolling ocean all moves on in perfect motion. All is change and ever rolling ocean. All moves on in perfect motion. All is change and ever rolling ocean. All moves on.
In the cabinet where you put salad dressing and spaghetti sauce and applesauce.
Ocean, all is change and ever rolling ocean. All moves on in perfect motion. All is change and ever rolling ocean. I believed in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion, in the winds of steady change, and the ever-rolling ocean. I believe in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion, in the winds of steady change, and the ever-rolling ocean. I believe in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion, in the winds of steady change, and the ever-rolling ocean. I believe in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion, in the winds of steady change, and the ever-rolling ocean. I believed in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion, in the winds of steady change, and the ever-rolling ocean. I believed in solid ground until I saw the earth in motion.
Thank you, Matt. That was beautiful. At this time in our service, the UUCP usually recites our covenant, and we respectfully hope you all would join us. Mary Lee will post the slide with the words. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And now, a time for all ages with Matt Meyer.
Desmond the mouse lived in the most beautiful meadow in all the land. Every morning, Desmond would wake with the sunrise and spend the day playing in that meadow. And every night he would go to sleep under the beautiful starry sky in the middle of that meadow. One night, though, Desmond awoke to find that it was still dark out. He tried to roll over, get more comfortable, go back to sleep, but something was wrong. He could hardly move, and his tail was throbbing with pain. Reaching behind him, he felt that, well, there was some sort of giant boulder that seemed to have landed just on his tail. He tried pushing on this boulder behind him, and he tried tugging on his tail to get loose, but it was no use. He tried pushing on the boulder and tugging on his tail and pushing and tugging and tugging and pushing until he was just about out of breath, but he was stuck. Just then, he saw a giraffe passing by. Good news, he thought. "Oh, giraffe," he said, "it seems that some sort of boulder has landed on my tail in the middle of the meadow. If you could use your powerful legs to just nudge it a few inches in the other direction, I could get free." Well, the giraffe laughed at Desmond the way giraffes do. "You silly mouse," it said. "That's no boulder that's fallen on your tail out of nowhere. That is an elephant that's fallen asleep on your tail." Well, good news, thought Desmond. In that case, well, if you could just gently wake the elephant up and ask him to roll over just a few inches in the other direction, I could get free. "I don't know about that," said the giraffe. "I mean, you know what they say about letting sleeping elephants lie. I find it's best not to get involved in other animals' business. I find it's best to remain neutral in times like this." "Well," said Desmond, "I do not appreciate your neutrality." The giraffe wandered off, leaving Desmond alone again. He tried shouting out to wake up the elephant as loud as he could, but his little mouse voice was just too far away from those giant elephant ears on the way other end of that giant elephant body. He tried pushing on the elephant and tugging on his tail and pushing and tugging and tugging and pushing, but it was no use. When he had just about given up, he saw a gazelle pass by through the grasses. "Oh, gazelle," he called out, "it seems that this elephant has fallen asleep just on my tail in the middle of the meadow. If you could gently wake him up and ask him to roll over just a few inches in the other direction, I could get free." "I don't know about that," said the gazelle. "I mean, you probably know what they say about letting sleeping elephants lie. I find it's best not to get involved in other animals' business. I find it's best to remain neutral in times like this." The gazelle wandered off, and Desmond said almost to himself this time, "I do not appreciate your neutrality." Well, one last time, Desmond tried shouting with all of his voice, pushing with all of his might, and tugging with all of his strength. And he tried shouting and pushing and tugging and tugging and pushing and shouting, but it was no use. And when he had just about given up for the last time, he saw another animal pass by through the grasses. This time it was a mouse. And he called out, and the mouse ran over and introduced himself, saying, "My name is Nelson. What seems to be the problem?" No sooner had Desmond explained the situation. Then Nelson ran all the way to the other end of that giant elephant body and shouted out to those giant elephant ears, "Excuse me. It seems you've fallen asleep on my friend's tail in the middle of the meadow. If you could roll over just a few inches in the other direction, he could get free." Well, the elephant heard Nelson's little mouse voice way down on the ground, but he was just too far away from those giant elephant ears at the top of that giant elephant head, and, well, the elephant was just a little too comfortable. He didn't budge. So Nelson ran back to Desmond and said, "I think I have an idea. Don't move." And he ran off into the grass, leaving a confused look on Desmond's face. And just when Desmond was starting to get worried again, he saw Nelson emerge through the grass, and this time he wasn't alone. He had found 3 mouse friends, and each of them had found another 3 mouse friends. And the whole group of them ran to the other end of that giant elephant body, and one mouse climbed up on the shoulders of another, and another climbed up on their shoulders until they had a whole mouse ladder all the way up the back of that giant elephant head. And at last, Nelson carefully and slowly climbed up the shoulders of his mouse friends one after another and stood right at the opening of that giant elephant ear. And he shouted down into it, "Excuse me. It seems you've fallen asleep on my friend's tail in the middle of the meadow. Move over just a few inches so he can get free." This time, his voice was just too loud to ignore. And so the elephant made a long, low grumble and rolled over just a few inches in the other direction. Nelson and the other mice climbed back down to the ground, and they met up with Desmond, and the whole group of them spent the rest of that day playing together in the meadow. Archbishop Desmond Tutu has said, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have already taken sides with the powerful and with the oppressor." He said, "If an elephant is standing on the tail of a mouse will never appreciate your neutrality." As Unitarian Universalists, we've envisioned in our hearts and articulated in our principles the goal of justice and equity and compassion in our relationships and in this world. And that means that we take sides for justice. We take sides for equity and compassion. It means that we work together to side with love. May it be so, and may we make it so.
Thank you, Matt. That was a great story. Each week we share our joys and sorrows, because as they say, a joy shared is a joy doubled, and a sorrow shared is a sorrow halved. If you have a joy or sorrow you would like to share, please type it in the chat. Your contributions will be read by Reverend Alice. Reverend Alice, don't forget to unmute yourself one time. It's wonderful to see so many folks from the Unitarian Universalist Church of Birmingham. We're very happy to be having this service together.
Absolutely. From the UU Church of Pensacola, which could be Laura or Mary Lee, but from our church, we would like to lift up good healing for Mary Ann Hodges. And from Reverend Julie Conradi, thinking of Mary House Kessler as we plan and prepare the memorial for her partner, Pat, this Saturday. Oh. Sorry to hear that. and also my grandmother-in-law who fell yesterday and has a brain bleed in Lubbock, Texas. Oh my goodness. Well, certainly hold her in our thoughts also. And from Kate Etheridge, lifting up my Aunt Pat who passed away. Sorry to hear that, Kate. I'll hold space for just another few minutes or seconds here in case there's anything else that's been left out. As always, there are joys and sorrows that remain in our hearts, yet unspoken. And so for those, we hold all of our friends and family and loved ones in our thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Alice.
Oh, wait, here's one from Wanzetta. Charles West, as he prepares for surgery in 2 weeks. Thank you, Wanzetta Flowers, for that one.
It's now time for our weekly offering. Reverend Julie is going to give us a short explanation. It's going to be a video, but we're having technical difficulties. Reverend Julie, would you like to read your explanation or message?
Good morning, everyone. Just a reminder for those from the Birmingham church that our church is supported by those who call our church home and by those who support the efforts of our church to change the world for the better. We share our cash plate every Sunday with an organization whose work reflects UU values to care for marginalized persons, advocate for real and systemic change, defend our environment, and promote justice and equity for all. This month's Share the Plate recipient is Be a Blessing Birmingham. It is an outreach program to our homeless neighbors in downtown Birmingham, providing them with the supplies and comfort and love that they so desperately need. Be a Blessing provides clothing, food, and other amenities to our houseless neighbors, and they recently purchased a portable shower that they're looking for a place to put it in downtown Birmingham. During this time of social distancing and online worship, please know that our expenses continue. We appreciate you continuing to pay your pledge. Our Venmo account is at UUCBHAM, and please designate whether your offering is for UUCB or Be a Blessing Birmingham. I will tell you that as of this morning, we only have one donation to Be a Blessing Birmingham. So if there is any chance that you can share a little bit with that organization as they continue their justice work, it would be most appreciative. Thank you for your generous support, and our Share the Plate recipient, may we give and love and hope.
Thank you, Reverend Julie. Now, while Matt Myers plays us some music, there will be time for you to do your pledge or your offering, and information on that will be posted in the chat. Thank you, Matt. We're ready for you.
Oye, mi gente, traemos la fuerza. La libertad es la única bandera. Oye, mi gente, traemos la fuerza.
Listen, my people, we bring the power.
La libertad es la única bandera.
Liberty is the only flag.
Oye, mi gente, traemos la fuerza. La libertad es la única bandera. Listen, my people, my condor, my eagle. No condor, my eagle. No human being can ever be illegal. Oye, mi gente, traemos la fuerza, la libertad es la única bandera. Oye, mi gente, traemos la fuerza, la libertad es la única. Listen, my people, my condor, my eagle. No human being can ever be illegal. Listen, my people, my condor, my eagle. No human being can ever be illegal. Oye, mi gente, trae. La libertad es la única bandera. Oye, mi gente, traemos la fuerza. La libertad es la única bandera. Listen, my people, my condor, my eagle. No human being can ever be illegal. No human being can ever be illegal. No human being can ever be illegal.
Thank you, Matt. And now a reading. Invitation to Brave Space by Mickey Scott Bay Jones. Together, we will create brave space because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together. And we will work on it side by side. And now back to Matt.
This next song, Let the Life I Lead Speak for Me. I originally learned that it was a traditional Irish folk tune, but it seems like it actually was written by a 70s R&B group called the Consolers. Either way, I invite you to sing along at home. Just because we're muted and can't hear each other doesn't mean we can't sing together. It doesn't mean we can't breathe together in rhythm. The song goes like this. Let the life I lead speak for me. Let the life I lead speak for me. When I come to the end of the road and I lay down my heavy load, let the life I lead speak for me. Let's do that verse again. Let the life I lead speak for me. Let the life I lead speak for me. When I come to the end of the road and I lay down my heavy load, let the life I lead speak for me. Let the friends I have, let the friends I have speak for me. Let the friends I have speak for me. When I come to the end of the road and I lay down my heavy load, let the friends I have
of the road, and I lay down my heavy load. Let the work I do speak for me. Let the love I share, let the love I share speak for me. Let the love I share speak for me. When I come to the end of the road, and I lay down my heavy load, let the love I share speak for me. And let the songs I sing, here we go. Let the songs I sing speak for me. Let the songs I sing speak for me. When I come to the end of the road, and I lay down my heavy load, let the songs I sing speak for me. And let the life I lead, let the life I lead speak for me. Let the life I lead speak for me. When I come to the end of the road, and I lay down my heavy load, let the life I lead speak for me. Well, I just start just about every morning with a to-do list. Usually, to be honest, it is an overly ambitious to-do list. And at the end of the day, many things on the post-it note often remained unchecked at bedtime. And one thing in particular that often goes unchecked at the end of the day is making time for writing. It's not that writing isn't important to me. I'm so dedicated to being a writer that every day I put it on the list. And I'm so dedicated that every day I collect quotes and prompts and story ideas so that eventually I'll have a lot of inspiration for things to write. I'm so dedicated that every day I work on other tasks and I finish other pressing commitments so that I'll eventually have a lot of time to write. I'm so dedicated that surely one of these days I'll start writing. One of my favorite authors, Anne Lamott, talks about this, about how hard it is, in fact, to just sit down every day and put your butt in the chair and write. She says, "The discouraging voices will hound you. This is all piffle," they will say, and they might be right. What you are doing may just be practice, but this is how you're going to get better. Some of the best writing advice I ever got was from a workshop leader who once told me, "Take a few minutes and for now, well, don't write, but just, well, write what you would write if you were going to write." I sometimes feel like in all the years since I got that advice, I haven't written anything since, but I have written a lot about what I would write if I did write. You might call this the practice of practicing, learning how to practice. The problem with beginning a creative project, whether it's writing or music or working on ourselves, is that the end product we might imagine is just so far from where we're starting. Too often, the person we would like ourselves to be can feel so far from the person we see in the mirror every morning. Certainly, the world as we would like it to be can feel impossibly far from what we read in the headlines each day. The demons of perfectionism stand in the way of good writing, just as they stand in the way of creative risk-taking in general. And this is unfortunate because we know that creating a life for yourself that doesn't yet exist requires some creative risk-taking. Certainly in uncertain and anxious times like these that we're living through, just showing up as your best self every day requires setting aside those discouraging voices that hound us.
And too often, just imagining a world of true justice and equity and compassion means setting aside those voices that say your efforts are just piffle. When the demons of perfectionism show up like this, I try to practice the practicing of showing up for myself and for others. Musicians know something about practicing. One of the requirements for all students at Berklee College of Music in Boston, where I attended years ago, was 4 semesters of ear training. Ear training is learning to sight sing music just by reading the notes on the page and learning to write down the notes just by listening to a song. And when I began school, I knew that there certainly were people who were capable of this kind of magic, but it seemed like some kind of Harry Potter nonsense to me. Like, you may as well ask me to walk into the classroom and transform my desk into a toad using a conductor's baton. It seemed impossible. I remember the first day of that class, there was a nervous silence among most of us students, except for one student who was quite vocal in his nervousness. There was one student who interrupted the teacher in the first few minutes of the class to share that he was worried the class would be too advanced for him. He wanted to make it clear that he knew not a single thing about ear training. The teacher kindly paused his introductions to respond. He explained that we'd all taken entrance exams and he was sure we'd been placed in the appropriate class. The teacher tried to continue, but was interrupted again. Well, the man said, but is this like the very lowest class? Because I need to be in the very lowest class. Now, at this point, our poor teacher kind of looked around the room sheepishly, not really wanting to answer that, yes, we were a class of the most basic students. Well, it is ear training 101, he kind of stuttered. So I guess it is the lowest. There is, I guess, a class for people that have previously failed the 101, but you all are just about the lowest. Now, some of the other students giggled a little bit at this point, laughing at this man's anxieties. But I was actually kind of glad to hear that someone was questioning what felt like the absurd notion that sight singing was even something that could be taught. I don't know what happened next for that student, but he never came back to our class. Not because anything we did on that first day was in fact too hard for him, but I think he lacked a belief that improvement was even possible. I kept going, thinking that if generations of students have done this before me, I guess it must be possible somehow, even if I personally can't see the way forward. And I made a commitment to at least practice the material. I've always remembered this other student, though. This other student who gave up before he'd started. It's not just that he didn't try to become a great master at ear training. It's that he didn't even try the practicing of it, which always struck me as the real loss. When the discouraging voices hound me, I sometimes think of him, and I remind myself that maybe, just for now, the work I'm doing is just practice. But practice is how I'm going to get better. When this pandemic arrived a little over a year ago, it was a time of quick adaptation, and it has been a time of adaptation ever since. Every week, something new, continually trying to plan for a future that we can't imagine. I imagine that the next year, much like the last one, will be a time of learning and relearning new ways of being together all over again, of organizing our days differently all over again, of organizing our people differently all over again, as the ground beneath us continues to shift constantly. But times of adaptation and change are also times of imagination, imagining new ways of being together. And because of that, this is a time calling on those in power, which in some ways is all of us, to learn some new roles and to learn some new tunes. Particularly for white people, I think this is a time to practice some new skills and some new ways of being in our communities. a time for listening in deeper ways we haven't always done so well before, and having some hard conversations we just haven't practiced enough. Fellow white folks, when you hear people of color making demands in the ongoing uprisings all around us, now is the time to practice amplifying those voices that fight to be heard elsewhere by repeating them in calls to your representatives and colleagues and family. If you inherited wealth that was accumulated in a time of racial segregation, which is true of all wealth in this country, it is time to practice giving it away. And if your muscle memory has been to call the police when something goes wrong, now is the time to practice something new. I know I won't all of a sudden do all of these things, but I will practice the doing of them. Musicians know as well as anyone that muscle memory is very real. We know that consistent practicing changes the very structure of our brains, rewiring our circuitry, forging new connections and new possibilities. No one is born a musician. Musicians are just the ones that learned how to practice. Even songbirds need elder birds to sing to them and teach them their melodies. Practice doesn't make music perfect, but it makes music possible. So let us practice the practicing, showing up for ourselves and others to build that new world of justice and equity and compassion, imagining new ways of organizing our days and organizing our people. Practice won't make the world perfect, but it makes a better world possible. I know that someday I want to be a true expert in justice and compassion. Someday I want to be well practiced at creating that brave space, even when there's no such thing as safe space. Someday I want to be masterful at amplifying the voices that fight to be heard elsewhere, and I want to be skillful at speaking more truth and more love. I want to be part of transforming our so-called justice system that has hurt so many so deeply. I want to be part of shifting an education system that fast-tracks some to college and others to prison, and transforming an energy sector that's been working overtime to overheat our planet. These are daunting tasks, to be sure. On most days, learning to transcribe a symphony seems more manageable than any one of them. But that's okay, because for now, I don't have to do all of those things. I just need to practice doing what I would do if I were doing them. So dear ones, don't promise to be your best self today. Just be the person you would be if you were practicing being your best self. Don't try to rebuild a new world in the image of love this week. Just practice doing what you would do if you had committed to such things. You have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We all have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. And so let us start together. Let us grow together, and let us practice together. May it be so. Our closing song is by Sarah Lynch Thomason, a musician and climate justice activist in Appalachia. This song, like the best music, I think, and perhaps like the best faith communities, calls us not to turn away from difficult things, not to ignore the crises of our time, but to look at them directly, to name them honestly, and to move forward to address them together. I invite you to sing along as you get a sense of it.
There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. There are more waters rising, they will find their way to me. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. Let's try that again. I invite you to sing along at home. Here we go. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. There are more waters rising, they will find their way to me. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. There are more fires burning, there are more fires burning, this I know, this I know. There are more fires burning, this I know. There are more fires burning, they will find their way to me. There are more fires burning, this I know, this I know. There are more fires burning, this I know. More mountains falling, there are more mountains falling, this I know, this I know. There are more mountains falling, this I know. There are more mountains falling, they will find their way to me. There are more mountains falling, this I know, this I know. There are more mountains falling, this I know. I will wade through the waters when they find their way to me. I will wade through the waters, this I know, this I know. I will wade through the waters, this I know. I will wade through the waters when they find their way to me. I will wade through the waters, this I know, this I know. I will wade through the waters, this I know. I will walk through the fire. I will walk through the fire, this I know, this I know. I will walk through the fire, this I know. I will walk through the fire when they find their way to me. I will walk through the fire, this I know, this I know. I will walk through the fire, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains, I will rebuild the mountains, this I know, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains when they find their way to me. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know. There are more waters rising. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. There are more waters rising, they will find their way to me. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. Beloveds, don't promise to be your best self today. Just be the person you would be if you were practicing being your best self. Don't try to rebuild a new world in the image of love this week. Just practice doing what you would do if you had committed to such beautiful things. You have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow, so let us start together, let us grow together, and let us practice together. Go in peace, go in love, and go and be blessed as you are a blessing to others.